My name is John Ramirez. I served at CIA from 1984 to 2009. And in those 25 years, I was assigned to the Directorate of Science and Technology in the SIGINT field, and in the Directorate of Intelligence as a weapons intelligence analyst. I ended my career with the Office of Director of National Intelligence in the counterproliferation field. Now at CIA, I was what is known as a technical electronic intelligence, or as anyone in the military or the IC with that type of background would know, is called tech-elant. Now, what is tech-elant, and how does that relate to UFOs or UAPs? Well, let me describe tech-elant first. Tech-elant is this discipline under SIGINT that is related to emanations of electromagnetic energy radiated by weapon systems, such as surface-to-air missiles, such as cruise missiles, ballistic missile defense systems, air-to-air missiles. You get the idea, weapon systems. And we don't just collect and analyze the parameters of these weapon systems signals. We also dive into what made this emanation work. How does it work? And try to reverse engineer in software using modeling and simulation the actual transmitter and receiver chain of that particular emitter. We're literally reconstructing that radar or that seeker on paper within the computer and try to exploit it in that manner. So it's a little bit more complicated than what most military people call ELANT, which is operational ELANT. That's just basically like collecting or detecting signals and looking it up in a database and associating that signal with a known emitter. So how does that relate to UFOs and UAPs? I am intrigued that the USS Princeton, CG-59, might have collected emanations of an electromagnetic nature from the Tic Tac. I know that the USS Princeton has a piece of equipment that I'm very familiar with called the AN/SOQ or SLIC 32. It is a countermeasures piece of equipment designed to collect signals of a threat nature and then generate counter signals to deceive or to deflect that particular weapon systems. And I'm being very, very careful in my description of the SLIC 32. I myself was an electronic warfare technician prior to joining CIA. And as an electronic warfare technician, I'm very familiar with how signals intelligence is conducted on board a Navy ship. I believe that if these signals exist, and I have a suspicion where they might be, it opens up an avenue of other research and opens up an avenue for a Freedom of Information Act request on at least the fact of that such signals were collected. Now, who would characterize these signals in the intelligence community and in the military, in the defense community? Well, obviously, the National Security Agency is the SIGINT agency for the U.S. government. Having said that, the CIA also does signals intelligence, but in a different way and for a different purpose. And it's beyond the scope of my explanation now. But CIA also does SIGINT, and that's why I was an ELANT analyst in the CIA and not at NSA. So NSA probably might have these signals. Now, who else might have these signals? I believe the Office of Naval Research might have collected this data from the Princeton. And my suspicion is it is a group known as, within ONR, Code 31, Division 312. And Division 312 is Electronics, Sensors, and Network Research. And part of that is electronic warfare. So The Slick 32 being an electronic warfare piece of equipment on a naval vessel, I do believe that Division 312 might have analyzed these emanations from Tic Tac and other similar craft where a signals intelligence collection system was able to collect these signals. And again, it's a whole very, very right field for a FOIA request to find out for sure. From the Scale Request of the Pentagon book, we learned that DIA was on the ground collecting optical, electro-optical, radiological, visual, electromagnetic emanations of the phenomenon. This is a field known as Measurement and Signature Intelligence, or MASINT. And DIA is the intelligence agency responsible for MASINT. On the ground, on Earth. But what about in space? What intelligence agency is responsible for collecting similar types of intelligence from space? Let me introduce you to another three-letter agency, NGA, or the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. The NGA is responsible for collecting imagery of the Earth from space and also the space above the Earth. There's a distinction. One is looking down at the Earth, one is looking at the space right above the Earth. Therefore, NGA is likely to be the intelligence agency that might have collected UAPs in flight. And this intelligence agency is not well known amongst those who follow the UAP issue. But let me take you on a little scenario. Let's say NGA analysts, their imagery analysts, detected unusual orbs of energy, light orbs, in their imagery. And let's say that these energy orbs were flying in formation under intelligent control with an intent to a destination. Now, the first thing that the NGA analysts would do was to eliminate plausible explanations. It seems reasonable. Let's look at Occam's razor. Let's see what it could be. So that's where the weapons intelligence analysts will come into play, looking at the inventory of China and Russia. What do they have that could do similar things? Now, let's say that one of the craft in the Russian inventory, the MiG-31, carries on board a plasma stealth generator. And the plasma stealth generator can produce a similar type of electro-optical signature to these types of satellites collecting imagery. But the weapons intelligence analysts eliminated the MiG-31 because, first of all, the MiG-31 cannot fly above 123,000 feet. It still holds that record above 123,000 feet for an air-breathing craft. It usually flies between 85 to 100,000 feet in a combat mode, designed to look down and shoot down a fast-moving aircraft. And what would that be? The SR-71. And that is why the SR-71 doesn't fly anymore. It's very vulnerable to the MiG-31 and its capabilities. So let's eliminate the Russian MiG-31. What next? Well, then the imagery analysts will go and look at the software, the processing software on the ground. And it checks out. The software is fine. It did not create these aberrations in the data. Next is the spacecraft itself. NRO is responsible for the care and feeding of these spacecraft. And they designed these spacecraft where they would know more about these spacecraft than anyone else. So they will look at these spacecraft collecting imagery, and they say, oh, they're fine, nothing wrong. So now we have an interesting issue. So the NGA and NRO together decide that they need to deep dive into what is going on. And they create a working group. And they invite subject matter experts from all the major intelligence agencies and their contractors. And they create a compartment for this effort. And they meet at an NGA facility And let's say that they studied this in depth and they looked at every plausible, unusual explanation going back to the UFO files and its disposal for this working group because they have the staff compartment to look at them. And they decide that, okay, there is something up there, like ores, that we cannot explain. And they brief the Director of National Intelligence at that point. And they write a report for the Director of National Intelligence. And the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, they will queue up something called decision levers, because they need to brief the highest level of government, the President of the United States. As you never take a problem to the President, you take solutions. And that's what the decision levers are. They're options that the President can execute. And attached to every decision lever are possible outcomes and an assessment of unintended consequences. And it's up to the President to decide what he or she might want to do. The intelligence community never, ever makes policy. That is up to the President to make policy. And the policy was, we need to study this phenomenon more, but not provoke it. And so that's queued up. And then we have ALSAT coming in through the wings. The previous working group was in Title 50. That is the civilian side of these intelligence agencies. CIA is totally Title 50. That is civilian, not military. The NRO, the NSA, DIA, the NGA are also known as combat support agencies under Title 10. They have a defense role. And as a defense intelligence agency, not DIA, but a military intelligence agency, they're responsible for examining threats. And that's where ALSAT came in. Now, when you tell the Pentagon that Congress wants it to capture something, it implies some kind of kinetic force. That is, shoot it down. And I'm not sure that's the way to go. I don't hold my breath for any kind of disclosure from the government. Disclosure implies a top-down approach from the government to we the people. In turn, I favor more of a upward approach from the people to the government, an approach I call discovery versus disclosure. And in discovery, citizen science plays an important role, as well as now we can actually ask our candidates for office, what do they feel about UAPs? What is their policy? What is their intent on investigating UAPs? It's no longer some weird crackpot question. So what about all these craft that people are seeing, whether they be saucer-shaped, cigar-shaped, triangles, or orbs of energy? I myself have not experienced a metallic craft that is a saucer-shaped, cigar-shaped, or triangular-shaped craft, or an acorn shape, or whatever many, many different shapes these craft appear to people. I have experienced light energy orbs in my life. I'd like to relate to you an interesting story because the synchronicities are amazing. I was on a flight from BWI, that is Baltimore, Washington International Airport, to LAX, Los Angeles International Airport. I happened to be on that flight to attend a UFO conference with a CIA colleague. And let me say this. Both of us are traveled on our own dime. This was not an official CIA trip in any way. We were both interested in UFOs because of experiences we had personally in our personal lives. Now, having said that, it is a requirement for CIA officers when they travel, even on a personal trip, to report that travel to the Office of Security External Activities Branch. So I did so, letting them know that I was going to a UFO conference. I gave them my flights and the hotel I was staying at. And so on the way there, on the plane, we were flying over I would say the southwest part of the United States, getting close to California, and the pilot reported a UFO. Now let me explain that. It didn't occur over the intercom. Back then, United Airlines used to broadcast the air traffic control and cockpit voice communications over Channel 1. And they did that through these old-fashioned pneumatic headphones that you plug in. It was purely a tube plugged into air, if you remember those days. And I was tuned to Channel 1. And there was not much going on, just the usual air traffic control talk. And to understand why I was on Channel 1, I am an aviation nerd, geek, whatever you want to call it. I love listening to that. And so over the Southwest, I heard the pilot or someone, the co-pilot maybe, report to air traffic control that they spotted a fast-moving orange orb on their port or left side of the craft at a distance, and that was coming across into their flight path at a very rapid speed. And the ATC reported that they held no contacts. There was nothing in the sky correlating to the visual report of the cockpit. I immediately looked out the right side where I was seated, the starboard side window, and there it was, an orange orb flying from the south to the north. Interesting, though, that in the southwest, north of our position, there is Nevada. So I keep that in mind. But there it was, an orange orb. It had absolutely no physical shape other than it was spherical and it was orange. And it receded and gave off this orange light, but it wasn't a shiny light at all. It wasn't as if the light shined from within to without. It just was this orange orb, as if you would cut out a large orange disc out of some orange construction paper, brightly lit, kind of like fluorescent, and there it was. I couldn't see any kind of like spectral energy coming off of it. It was just orange. And it so happens that, that it was with this experience going to a UFO conference. And I've always thought about that. Now, do I discount the other sightings of triangles or saucers or cigar shapes or any of the shapes? No, I don't. Even though I personally have no knowledge of those kinds of craft, I believe that we should embrace everything widely, but hold things lightly. Hold things lightly so that they're applicable to you. They may not be applicable to someone else. But don't just toss it away saying it's impossible. No, I don't believe in this. It's ridiculous. I don't do that. And I've been enriched by doing that because later I may find information, either something I've researched or something that was, and I would say downloaded to me, that something I held lightly should be held a little more tightly. I do know that there is something flying that is unacknowledged. I've never been read into that program. I know it exists, and here's why. Because I know the customer for this program. The customer is, again, NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And so this intelligence agency, of course, is concerned with imagery intelligence, optically and electro-optically. So whatever is flying that is unacknowledged, whatever shape it might be, is collecting from an aerospace altitude those types of data. And that's all I know, and that's all I can say. I personally have been never cleared or do not have any knowledge of other craft, but I don't discount anything. I'd like to address the recent release of notes purportedly taken by Dr. Eric W. Davis on a conversation with Admiral Thomas, who was director of the DIA. Do I believe these notes are authentic, genuine? Yes, I do. And here's why. And there's two reasons why. First of all, I am very familiar with the Special Access Program process. And at CIA, we have the Controlled Access Program process, SAPs and CAPs. I was a CAP officer in charge of a very sensitive program dealing with a relationship we had of a very covert nature with ostensibly an adversarial country. And because CIA cleared my presentation for public release and said nothing in that presentation was classified, I can reveal this, that the Central Intelligence Agency and the People's Liberation Army of China had a technical partnership to build collection facilities in China. CIA officers built what ostensibly would be miniature pine gaps in China to collect technical intelligence against the Soviet Union. CIA officers worked side by side with officers of the People's Liberation Army. CIA officers trained officers of the People's Liberation Army to use sophisticated electronic equipment similar to what we have at Pine Gap and probably closer to what we had in Iran at these sites called Taxman that the Shah allowed us to have to do the same, monitor the Soviet Union. And we will monitor ballistic missile tests and other tests at Sarai-Shagan, which is the Russian equivalent of Area 51 and White Sands Missile Range all rolled up into one. And that was a controlled access program, extremely sensitive. On this controlled access program, there was a bigot list. And you've heard of bigot lists already. It is extremely, extremely narrow in that there are very, very few people on that bigot list. So even though that you might have a top secret SCI clearance, you may not be on the bigot list. Even though you might have a titled position in the intelligence community, you may not be on that bigot list. So on that bigot list, I can reveal that there were presidents of the United States, secretaries of state, Department of Defense officials, including the Secretary of Defense, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and at that time it was called Intelligence and Security, INS, and the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, ATL, and a whole host of CIA officers, but numbering like very few, from various parts of the CIA, including logistics, technical officers such as myself, people responsible for making this program run. There was a few NSA personnel on it, no DIA personnel whatsoever on it. I don't recall the then director of DIA being on that list. So yes, you can have a very tightly controlled program without a major officer of the intelligence community on that program. The fact of the director of DIA knew about these programs, that's one level of a SAP. The fact of that you know this program exists. That's what Admiral Wilson knew. But he wanted to know more, and he was denied that. The programmatics, as we call it, the logistics, the budget, the location, the progress made in that program, all of the details at the program level, he was denied. And I believe that that's possible based on my own experience with this other program. Now, I just want to say that I was the control access program officer for this at a very brief time because I did not want to have this responsibility. So I returned it to the sponsoring office, which I cannot reveal. But I returned it saying, I don't want this job. But it was very, very insightful to see who was on that bigot list and who was not on the bigot list. Now, secondly, I happen to know Eric Davis in a way that he does not know I know him. And I can't reveal, I don't have his permission from Dr. Eric Davis to reveal how I would know him. But there are several CIA officers in a managerial capacity that knew him. And so I hope that Eric Davis will reach out to me, or I can reach out to him to see if I can tell the rest of the story. And if you hear the rest of the story of how these CIA officers know Eric Davis, I think it will surprise you based on the timeline of what Eric Davis was doing at the time, his work with the Air Force Research Labs, and his subsequent work with OSAC. And that's all I can say for now. Eric, I would love to hear from you. So what does the government know and what doesn't it know? Well, the government knows a lot, and you know the government knows a lot. More than what they're willing to share, more than what they've released in FOIA. I would say this, that as we progress forward, since 2017, a landmark year for ufology, the government seems to be able to address this more openly. We have the release of the book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, and I have my own presentation, which I thought would be redacted in many, many ways, but it went through completely without redaction. And I say the phenomenon with a capital P because that's the way the government kind of lumps it all together. Whether it be like metallic craft, light energy orbs, presence of ETs in a corporeal sense, higher consciousness, what's being channeled, what's being experienced, it's all labeled under the phenomenon, including, as we learned, the more disturbing aspects of the phenomenon, which appear to be malevolent to human beings. So it's all lumped under phenomenon. And the fact that we can discuss this now is a big step forward. Now, as far as what the government doesn't know, I addressed it, this phenomenon that seems to be malevolent or from strangers, I call it. The government, I think, is still grappling with that issue. And I say strangers in the sense that it is my personal belief that there are residents, visitors, and strangers. Residents being, I believe, entities that have been here long before humanity appeared and in fact may have had some hand in making us who we are today. Otherwise, we'd still be primates with bonobos, chimpanzees, and gorillas. We're not. We've been elevated. And I believe it is the residents who did this. And I know that's very controversial, but it's a personal belief. That's how I sort it out for myself. And the visitors might actually be from other worlds. And the strangers, I don't know where they're from.
I recognize that the FOIAs were primarily directed at CIA. And CIA's part of the intelligence community is not as expansive as people would think, at least not since the other intelligence agencies were created. And so CIA's purview into UAPs started to shrink because there were other agencies looking at imagery. Of course, everyone knows NSA collects signals. And as far as the UAP impact on military, on our hardware, that's all in DIA's basket. So by directing FOIA straight at CIA and saying, do you have any pictures of anything? Or what do you know about this? The only thing you're going to get are historical records and not anything current, because we don't do current things in this field as to the point that people think we do, but we are still involved in it. So I wanted to let people know that there are more agencies than just CIA. And of course, Louis put DIA on the map and Snowden put NSA on the map. So, I mean, there's more than just CIA, and there's many, many other places that might have this type of information. So navigating is more about like where to go to get information in an FOIA format, and how to create an FOIA, and how to tailor it so that you'll get the proper response. It's so important to not ask for everything, but if you have a particular event in mind, kind of narrow it down to a region or event by date and time. So also, I wanted to bring out the sort of like an outline of how a UAP would be handled today. Now that we have these intelligence agencies and we have these sensors, how would we handle an appearance of an orb? And so I went through a hypothetical case, and I had to call it hypothetical. But it's, as we now know, there are orbs. But what happened before ALSAP? You know, a lot of folks think that, you know, it's ALSAP and orbs, but it was an ongoing process to get to ALSAP. And the fact that the intelligence community is not just like civilians, there's also military, and there's separate laws governing how civilian intelligence agencies might collect against an orb versus how a military agency might collect against the orb. So that's what I wanted to do, and also bring out a story, a narrative of what I think might have happened back in 47. And I'm not saying that this is what happened. I'm saying that I myself needed to sort it out for my own mind, because I'm an experiencer as well as an intelligence officer. And so looking at it that way, I just wanted to like connect the dots for myself. And for using the puzzle metaphor, I have the corners of the puzzle, but I'd never seen a picture in the box. So I kind of know, okay, these are the corners, and I have a pile of pieces, and I kind of know where the pieces go, but not all of them fit right. So how can I make all of the pieces fit right to attach to the corners? And then maybe I can see the picture on the box. I think others in the government have the picture in the box, but they're not sharing you anything. And others who claim to have pieces, they're throwing pieces out. And a lot of researchers, a lot of enthusiasts are putting the pieces together wrong. And whether it's intended that way or just playing mischief, I'm not sure. But there's a lot of information out there that doesn't make sense. And any intelligence officer can look at a document and tell you this is not a real document and point out the reasons why. That's what I bring to the table. I would like to help people understand what's real and what might not be real, and with the reasons why it might not be real, to unpack things, as I call it, as I hear information. And I'll give you an example, the Bob Fish emails. When I read through the emails, I saw where there were glaring errors in what Bob Fish said. Not to say that it isn't a credible source.
Can you just
But
expand on that for anyone that might not know what these are?
okay, I think Bob Fish wrote to Podesta, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, thinking that Hillary would win the election and become the next president, and he wanted to let Podesta know that since he has stated that they would like to open up the UFO files, he wanted to contribute his experience with what some of those files might contain. And so he apparently had a source, another person who was, of all things, an e-linter like myself, an electronic intelligence person. And so he was like relating things kind of secondhand based on the way I read it, because I could have put in more detail in what Bob Fish revealed. But he was on the right track. And it's just that the little things were like not quite correct. And in fact, the correct unpacking of it is even more profound than what he said. So that's the Bob Fish story, and it went to UFO Joe Murgy. So he had the emails and contacted him directly. As we said before, it's more of an overview of what America's intelligence agencies do, but with a focus on UFO UAP investigations by the US government. This is a little bit about me. GS-15 retired. I retired in 2009. In the 25 years, I started in the Directorate of Science and Technology in the SIGINT field and the Director of Intelligence in the Weapons Intelligence Analysis field. Toward the end of my career, I was at the ODNI National Counterproliferation Center, and then ended my career back at CIA. This is a very important slide because what this slide says is nothing in this presentation contains classified information and can be shared or published. So that's why I'm sharing it with everyone who is watching today. And they don't endorse what I say, and they don't even admit that anything I say is true or false. So it gives the government some leeway in kind of distancing themselves from what I might say, but this is very standard for anyone at CIA writing a book or a memoir or even a slide presentation like this. And they did not in any way tailor my presentation. They received it cold, they looked at it, analyzed it. I believe they sent it further up into government since it relates to UFOs and UAPs. And there was nothing there that was classified anywhere in up and down the government's chain. And here's where we're going to go. These are meant to be modules. I can pull out modules and build upon them or leave them all in. So these are the 5 modules that I have for the presentation. The first part is pretty much about the intelligence community. The second part is about things that you may have heard about the intelligence community which are not true. And the third and fourth part more in line with a examination of the history and also some personal speculations based on that history. And I ended up with some favorite resources that I go to find information. So here we go. There are 18 agencies in the US intelligence community. It used to be that the Director of Central Intelligence headed the 18, but also wore another hat, the Director of Central Intelligence Agency. So one person was managing the, well, back then it was 16. One person was managing 16 agencies as well as CIA. And it was thought that this conflict of interest may have had an impact on sharing intelligence across these agencies when it related to counterterrorism. The FBI was reluctant to share intelligence with CIA. CIA was reluctant to share intelligence with the FBI. So when the alleged hijackers came from overseas into the US, CIA dropped them, but didn't tell the FBI to pick them up. The FBI did pick them up, but didn't tell CIA that they were working on trying to find out what these guys were doing. So that break in the stovepiping of this information was very critical in what happened. Now, there's 2 sides to the intelligence community. There's the defense side and the civilian side. And there's 2 sets of laws. Title 10 refers to the Department of Defense. And Title 50 refers to the DNI and the civilian agencies within the DNI. And the overlap is very important because it kind of tells you why CIA was not involved in the UAP task force. If you look at the participants, the glaring conspicuous by absence was CIA. First, this is where the ODNI headquarters is located. It's called Liberty Crossing in Fairfax County. We call it LX. If I move my cursor here, you can see that sort of like an L, and there's the X. A trivia fact was that Louis Elizondo and I were both in this building at the same time, and I've never seen him, and I don't believe he's ever seen me. If we've met, it would have been in this hallway. It connects the two cafeterias together. But I didn't know who he was, and he didn't know who I was at all. And so it's a large enterprise, and that website there will tell you how this is supposed to work, the 18 agencies. So even though there are 8, okay, so these are the 3 mission areas in the ODNI: counterterrorism, counterproliferation, and counterintelligence. I was in the National Counterproliferation Center, but most people know the National Counterterrorism Center. They have the very large watch center that presidents go to make speeches. They also have the auditorium in the building where presidents make speeches. And so most people focus on the counterterrorism side of the ODNI, but it also includes counterproliferation and counterintelligence. So there are 18 members in the intelligence community, but 5 are more equal than others, let's say. And these are listed in the order that legislation founded them. CIA was founded in 1947. It's always the agency. And the IC, other members of the IC get annoyed that we always call ourselves the agency. And whereas the other agencies, you know, you say National Security Agency or National Reconnaissance Office. But we are the agency. We founded in 47. The fort is what we call the National Security Agency. And all of these agencies were founded due to some perception of a failure or the lack of some capability. 1952 was the middle of the Korean War. The Chinese entered the Korean War. It was believed that it was a failure of communications intelligence to be able to indicate and warn that the Chinese were going to enter the Korean War. So Congress set up a dedicated agency to collect signals, and that became the National Security Agencies, took out that function out of CIA, gave it to the NSA. During the 50s, there was a battle between the Air Force and the CIA as to who owned the skies in terms of reconnaissance. The CIA, of course, as you know, had the U-2 aircraft. The Air Force, particularly Strategic Air Command under Curtis LeMay, he was touting the B-66 bomber, converting that into an intelligence collecting craft. And there were fierce battles between the two. So Congress created the National Reconnaissance Office to blend in both U.S. Air Force equities and CIA equities in intelligence from the air and space, and also later was joined by the U.S. Navy. And they're called Westfields or the Towers or Taj Mahal. The Taj Mahal because at one time the NRO had the most plush building in the intelligence community, if not the federal government. They had like some of the nicest facilities, but that's no longer true. And so now we have the DIA, were founded in 1961. So we don't call it the DIA, everyone calls it the DIAC. So if we're going to the DIA at Joint Base Bowling Anacostia, we don't say we're going to DIA, we say we're going to the DIAC, and everyone knows that's the DIA. So they are a military intelligence agency in the sense that they look at what other foreign governments are doing in terms of their military capabilities and assess what our hardware might stack up against their hardware. And so this was a result of another failure or a controversy in the government between the missile gap and the bomber gap. The CIA and the Pentagon had fierce battles about who's ahead and who's behind. And because of that, Congress said, okay, we're going to have one agency to look at all things of military intelligence nature, and here's the DIA. The NGA, which in my opinion is the most important of the agencies in terms of UAP research, was actually part of CIA from a long time ago. It was called the National Photographic Interpretation Center, and later merged with Defense Mapping Agency. They called them the National Intelligence, the National Imagery and Mapping Agency. Now, General Schwarzkopf in the first Gulf War complained loudly, Congress heard, that the warfighter was not getting adequate imagery intelligence from the CIA because they were holding on to it, and because of the classification level of the imagery being top secret SCI, most folks in the military on the ground, the warfighter, doesn't have that type of level to get that intelligence, and very few officers did. So Congress then took that function away, joined it with a defense function for mapping, and that eventually became the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, in 2003. And Crystal Palace is sort of like an informal name. If you saw their headquarters, you can see why they call it the Crystal Palace, and we'll look at that later. So of the four big agencies, they're functional mission managers for various intelligence disciplines. We have human intelligence at CIA, and that's well known because human intelligence is about recruiting spies from other countries to report what they're doing to us. They also have open source intelligence, or OSINT. That term has become very popular because OSINT is what most of you do in terms of collecting FOIA documents and looking at websites and trying to stitch together some truth as to what's going on based on open source. The CIA is the functional mission manager for that in the open source enterprise. As we said before, NSA has SIGINT. The director of NSA, internally, we call it DERNSA. Never the director of NSA. So internally, we say DERNSA, and everyone knows that means the director. Now, measurement and signature intelligence became very popular most recently because they're the folks who specialized in the sensors that were collecting information at Skinwalker Ranch. And DIA has the functional mission manager responsibility for MASINT. And I've already mentioned NGA having geospatial intelligence. NRO is just is the mission enabler. They designed the sensor systems to collect against all of those other 5 intelligence disciplines from space. Now there are also science and technology intelligence centers. You know the one at the bottom, NASIC, but let's go through all of them. First one on the list is MISIC, and they're in Huntsville, Alabama, and they're part of the DIA. In Huntsville, Alabama, Redstone Arsenal, as you know, is the location where the German rocket scientists went. Werner von Braun had an office there with the Marshall Space Flight Center in the Redstone Arsenal. The National Ground Intelligence Center, we call it NGIC, their headquarters is in Charlottesville, Virginia. And of interest to some of you might be the fact that they are also the intelligence center for underground facilities. We all heard of ONI, but in the intelligence community, we know them as NMIC, the National Maritime Intelligence Center. They're located in Suitland, Maryland. And of interest to UAP researchers, they're the intelligence center with responsibility for undersea weapons and facilities. And so NASIC had many names over the years. During the Roswell era, it was called T2 Intelligence. And they changed names. Most people know them as FTD, Foreign Technology Division. And there were several names up to the National Air and Space Intelligence Center. We call it NASIC. And of course, they're located in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So let's look at a crop circle and let's apply those intelligence disciplines to investigating a crop circle. It's not a good idea just to send it to CIA because they wouldn't have pictures of the crop circle. It's another agency that has photos of crop circles if they exist in that agency. So it's better to tailor the FOIA to the agency responsible for those 5 intelligence disciplines. So what intelligence discipline would be most involved in the crop circle? And I think you already know that that would be NGA. In the fall of 2020, and the timing is very interesting because, as you know, the Department of Defense established the UAP task force in August of 2020 and released the report in June of 2020. So right in between that period, NGA thought it would be important to be able to exploit circles. And they wanted to know where all of the circles were, the physical features and geographically referenced activities on the Earth related to circles. And it says here that the NGA seeks to know where all the circles in the world are and how big they are. I found that to be very interesting. And as far as the prize goes, it was awarded to, it was a public challenge to help NGA come up with algorithms to be able to detect circles on the ground. And you might think, well, gee, that's easy, just look for a circle. But a lot of the data the NGA collects from its sensors in space are scanned by artificial intelligence. It's not like the old days where you had film and you had someone, looking through like binoculars on a light table and then scanning like real film across looking for things. That's not true anymore. It's all digital. And so the computer needs to find of items of interest or object of interest in that frame. And so Circles presented a challenge to NGA and they awarded a prize to a college student, I believe from Russia or a former Russian republic, who had the best solution to implement finding circles. So for a crop circle, you might want to have human-to-human contact, a person-to-person contact. You might want to interview eyewitnesses who may have seen the phenomenon being created. Also, it may have been a news item in the local television or print media, or people may have taken pictures of it and posted it to social media. So that's an OSINT type of intelligence gathering. Something I haven't heard too much about, but I find intriguing, is whether electromagnetic data may have emanated or still emanating from a crop circle. So who would have that information? It would be NSA. And of course, DIA, everyone knows now that they collect radiological, biochemical, spectral, sonic data, all of the above that doesn't fit human OSINT and SIGINT. And the DIA scientists, as we now know, were deployed to Skinwalker Ranch with their sensors, collecting for DIA MASINT. And NGA, of course, collects optical photography and electro-optical, and that includes infrared and ultraviolet. So sending FOI requests to these agencies tailored to what you want to know about that crop circle makes a lot more sense than just sending it to just one agency who may not have the purview to have these intelligence disciplines under its roof. And we talked a little about NGA, and I want to talk about commercial imagery because commercial imagery isn't utilized enough. Of course, we all use Google Maps, Google Earth. A lot of people don't know that Google Earth was originally a CIA application given to Google It was called Earth Viewer. And so Google adapted it for its data. Now, Google does not own any satellites. The owner of Google satellites is Maxar Technologies. Formerly it was called Digital Globe. They're located in Westminster, Colorado, near Boulder. The first two satellites were actually NRO satellites transferred to a commercial company, and it was an older satellite technology, so the quality of the image was nowhere near what we call national technical means imagery, but it was very, very good. Now, the government allows 25 centimeters per pixel. That is the pixel resolution from about 383 miles up. And that's pretty fascinating, because what that means is if these commercial satellites wanted to do it, you can take a piece of paper 9.8 by 9.8 inches or 25 centimeters per side, and you can lay them all out and put objects on them that covers up the paper, and from 383 feet they can measure those objects. And that's quite the resolution up there. But usually they use 30 centimeter per pixel resolution, because that's the limit of what the commercial satellite companies are launching at this time. There was a time when Maxar thought that they could do their own satellites and not rely on NRO for assistance. WorldView 4 was their standalone satellite with no government help, and that failed in orbit a few years after it was launched. So now they're going back with WorldView Legion in 2022 as they retire the older satellites. So we'll have 6 brand new satellites up in the 2020s, and likely they will have more NRO input to get those satellites working. Now, if you follow my cursor here, this is where you get the most detailed imagery. It's straight down. We call this nadir, straight from the telescope right down to the Earth, straight, perfect, perpendicular to the Earth. That is the most useless imagery you can collect, because it doesn't do any good to look at the roof of the building. You want to be able to measure the building, how high it is and how wide it is. So most of the time we look over here, not straight down, so we get an angle to whatever object we're looking at. Now out here, the imagery is very poor, and that's what you see on Google Earth. Very poor imagery, like a meter pixel resolution, whereas the actual capability is like a third of a meter, 30 centimeters. Now, wouldn't it be great to be able to get on Google Earth and be able to see what your house looks like right there and walk outside and see yourself waving at the satellite? Can't do that, because what Google supplies is historic data, a snapshot in time that may have been taken a year ago, 6 months ago, maybe 2 years ago. It's going to be very dated imagery. Not so with NRO. For $300 million per year, you too can get 24/7 on-demand imagery from anywhere on Earth to monitor anything on Earth. But that's quite a lot of money to spend. But NRO does do that to augment its own satellites. And this is the Crystal Palace. This is the headquarters of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency in Springfield, Virginia. If you see pictures of it, and there are pictures inside released, it is tremendous building. It's very ornate inside. It's just amazing, this building that they built for NGA. It is the most important agency for UAP research, because as we know, the UAPs are like visual phenomena. They're lights, orbs, or craft. CIA doesn't take pictures, NSA doesn't take pictures, DIA doesn't take pictures. NRO has satellites that take pictures, but where do those pictures go? They go to NGA. And so it is the most likely place where you can actually maybe ask for a FOIA of collected and analyzed UFO or UAP data. But I looked at their FOIA requests for the last several years, and no one's ever asked them for anything related to UAPs. Well, hopefully that would change, because they might be sitting on a lot of data. So let's look at a hypothetical case. Let's say an orb appears, And I use the STS-75 tether incident as just an exemplar of an unusual phenomenon in space. This is when they had a high energy tether and it broke, and it was powered up to such a level that it started to attract things in space. And these are some of the objects that it tracked. NASA always, okay, so you can't say these are weather balloons or temperature inversions or like swamp gas. So the newest thing from NASA is dust. Oh, it's a dust on the lens. So that's what they call this. It's kind of a dust particle material on the lens, something that flew off when the tether broke. It's just dust particles. But if you look at YouTube videos of this STS-75 incident on that date, you'll see that these disks are actually flying and maneuvering in a very intelligent way and changing shapes, blinking, I would say. It's really interesting to see. So let's see what might happen if we detected an orb in space. Well, so let's say that they discover light energy orbs under intelligent control, flying in formation with intent to go to a destination. The first thing that the imagery analyst would do is to rule out foreign military technology, confirm that it's not a advanced aircraft. And so they would ask weapons intelligence analysts like my shop, for example, which studied signals coming from these advanced aircraft of other countries to see, could it be that? Could it be, like, for example, plasma stealth generators that were hooked up to the highest flying aircraft in the Russian inventory, the MiG-31, which can routinely fly between 85 to 100,000 feet and broke the altitude record at 123,000 feet. That's pretty high. Could it be that with a stealth plasma stealth generator? And no, it could not, because we know when they were in flight, and it did not conform to the events of these energy orbs. So we can rule that out as a cause of these orbs to be seen. So if it's not anything that is adversary technology, then we have to look on the ground and see if the software might have been malfunctioning. And the software was confirmed to be working within specifications. So, okay, what's next? Well, how about the spacecraft itself? How about the birds? We call spacecraft birds. How about the birds themselves? Are they working? And the birds were all functioning fine according to NRO. NRO is responsible for the care and feeding of the birds in orbit, and everything checked out fine. So now we have an interesting situation here. So the NGA and NRO reforms the DNI about what's going on up there. That's very unusual. And so the DNI decides we need to take a deeper dive into this. Let's examine what's going on here. So the DNI authorizes the establishment of a working group and also establishes a compartment to control dissemination as they study this. So the NGA, as lead agency, briefs the other agencies. Now, what do I mean by lead agency? The agency that owns the data is the agency that is the lead agency. They own the data because it's in their purview. NGA does imagery, and these were images. So as the lead agency, they're responsible then for conducting the working group. So they will brief CIA, NSA, DIA, maybe the Department of Energy. And within each of those agencies, they will establish an intra or internal agency working group and read in their own subject matter experts. And so now they gather all the subject matter experts together along with contractors, and they're the usual contractors that you are aware of, like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon. These are the big four. They read in their scientists and engineers, and they all meet together. And they'll invite all the concerned parties together to study the phenomenon. And more collection might be tasks. Let's let's collect more data and see what's going on. The objective is to reach some kind of consensus and write a report for the DNI. They owe the report to the DNI since they brought it up to the DNI. So the DNI will get this report about this orb phenomenon happening. And by the way, NGA does not look at imagery over the Earth from NRO satellites. They're looking at imagery over the Earth in adversarial countries or foreign countries. So you can assume that this happened, let's say Russia, that these orbs appeared over Russian airspace. So the DNI briefs the president and offers decision levers. It's important to understand that the intelligence community never, ever makes policy. Only the president makes policy. And so they offer policy recommendations to the president, but it's based on data and informed by analysis. So decision lever 1, I threw 3 of them together, 3 that made sense. Well, first is to observe, but continue active collection and analysis. This is a very passive stance. Just keep watching and see what happens. The second is to engage the phenomena in some way, but don't threaten it. That is, let's fly something toward it or do something perhaps to attract its attention, but don't make it feel like it's in danger. We're just trying to see what reaction might come by engaging this phenomenon. And the third is very dangerous because it's not only engaging a phenomenon, but provoking a reaction. And provoking in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2022 that left the House and it's on its way to the Senate. There's a provision in there for this UAP office within the Pentagon to report on efforts to capture a UAP. When you tell the Department of Defense that you're interested in capturing a UAP and you want reports on progress for capturing a UAP, it gives the Department of Defense the idea that it's a kinetic response. And so that's decision lever 3, provoke a reaction. And I don't recommend shooting anything down. I think that's a bad decision. That's my opinion, but it's up to the policymakers to decide how they want to handle that part of the NDAA. Sue Gordon was the primary principal deputy director of DNI in 2020, and she resigned in 2020. And so she's asking, she knows that the intelligence community is great at collecting data. They collect more data than they know what to do with. NSA collects so much data that they had to build a giant data center in Utah in order to hold all the data they collect. So we're great at collecting data, but we're not so great at processing the data or analyzing data to solve problems. And that's true with the UAP side as well. It's easy to collect data, but it's not so easy to find out what's in the data and what does it mean. And that leads to the UAP task force report. So when I read the UAP task force preliminary assessment, I came up with a few pointers of how I interpreted it. It was very clear to me that military tactical sensors on board the FA-18 Hornet were inadequate collectors of infrared data. Sure, I mean, they did exactly what they were supposed to do. As you saw, the engagement box was locked on to the UAPs in flight, right in the center. Had they launched a missile, if the UAP didn't detect it and move out of the way, the missile would have been directed toward that engagement center. But that's all they did. It's not designed to collect data and actually look at the infrared signature in a scientific way. It's designed to put a weapon onto a target based on a heat signature. So clearly that was inadequate. It was also made clear that the UAPs seem to have drawn, the national strategic sensors seem to have drawn the attention of the UAPs. And that's, to me, very fascinating, because amongst those national strategic sensors, as you know, are NRO imaging satellites. And if the UAPs were drawn to the national imagery satellites, there's a possibility that there could be like really good pictures of them, and pictures that, who knows, may have been, and video maybe, of these objects in flight in a very detailed fashion. So that's something that has not been released, and probably will not be released, because it will give away the performance of the NRO platforms, which are very, very good. The other one, the X-37B, I thought would get redacted. I put it in there on the chance that it wouldn't, because I associated the X-37B craft with a strategic sensor. But it is like a mini space shuttle. It has a payload bay doors that open, but it's completely unmanned. There's no one flying it. It flies autonomously. But it seems like if the UAPs were interested in some of our most advanced sensors, XB-37B is an advanced sensor. It was also clear that we lacked collection assets on the ground where the UAPs were interested, like DoD facilities, Department of Energy facilities, intelligence community facilities, and NASA facilities. We don't have anything under the water or of persistence that could collect against anything like that. Persistence meaning it's there 24/7, collecting and sending information for analysis. But as part of the NDAA, FY 2022, it establishes an office within the Pentagon to do this 24/7. So that's a good thing. It's now not just a task force that's temporary, but a permanent office. And there's a reporting requirement of 180 days. Not just one report, but every 180 days. We need a report, an update on what you're doing in terms of investigating and analyzing these UAPs. On the intelligence side, there are no national intelligence officers, NIOs, for UAPs. They write the National Intelligence Estimate. The official analysis of a major issue is called a National Intelligence Estimate. There's no one covering that for UAPs. There are national intelligence officers for aviation, but I think UAPs might be more advanced than just covering aviation, for example, and they need one for UAPs. And also, there's no subject matter experts covering UAPs as full-time analytic accounts. And what that means is there's no one there walking in the door and saying, your job is UAPs. That's all you do until the day you retire. There's no one like that. What happens is that in the course of doing our regular day-to-day analysis, which is, in my case, funded by the CIA program, CIAP, or at the DIA, the funding vehicle is called the General Defense Intelligence Program, or GDIP. It's just a big, huge pot of money, which is doled out by the respective financial officers, chief financial officers in each of these agencies, to the various groups and divisions within that agency to do certain things. So that's how you can do something within an intelligence agency without having a really big formal contract. It's part of your job, because that money also pays for your usual cast of contractors that are with you day in and day out, working side by side with you, as well as the government staff that are in there day in, day out. So unless you have to buy a building and buy a whole lot of equipment to put in that building, or deploy somewhere with that equipment and contractors deploying, you don't really need a special program budget. But you can carve it out of your existing budget, because, for example, one of my jobs might have been to look at the ballistic missile defense system of Russia. And they may have radars that may have tracked UAPs. Do I need to have a budget to say, okay, I want to study these UAPs tracked by these Russian radars? No, I don't. So that's how that's done. And the intricacies of the budget will give you a headache. It's basically looking at yards of spreadsheets with tiny little numbers on them. So let's clear up some misconceptions here. So one of the things I've been upset at is when people claim to have worked in the intelligence community and just them opening their mouth and saying a few sentences, I know that they've never set foot in any intelligence agency. And they've had zero access. And for whatever reason, they portray themselves as intelligence officers, I don't know. It could be just notoriety or just speakers' fees at conferences, sell books, I don't know. But there's a few things that have happened that will prevent people like me from coming forward. Because when we have true facts, and those facts run up against one of these imposters saying that, you know, this isn't the way it happened, this guy is fake, we're the true guys, and the fake guys are saying we're fake, and all of a sudden the UFO community just comes down upon us because they believe this other guy more than they believe the true guy. And so that's happened where I've talked to my colleagues saying, why don't you come out like I'm doing? And they said, no way, no way. I don't need to be insulted by these people who have no idea what they're talking about. And they're complete silence from those people. So I hope that what I'm doing will encourage them that if they have information, there's a way to present it for everyone that's legal, that's not a whistleblower, that's not leaking information. You don't want to attract the attention of counterintelligence people in the government by saying, I work for NSA and I have this information. That automatically, if you're a researcher receiving that information, nothing happens to you, Mr. or Ms. Researcher. Nothing happens to you. In the United States, possession of classified information, you can't be prosecuted for that. But the person who disseminates classified information can be prosecuted. So they look at you just to find out who you're talking to. So it's very dangerous unless you vet that person thoroughly, to gather information from outside sources, because two things are happening. Either they're truly leaking real information and they're doing it illegally, and the counterintelligence people are already onto them because you, as a researcher, announced that I have this and here's a slide. They're on it right away. Secondly, it's a planned, truly planned disinformation. They just want to stir the waters up just to cause mischief. And there might be people who might misuse their position to cause mischief. So that's very important to consider. So we're going to look at MK Ultra and what's an agent, above top secret, and cosmic. So MK Ultra, everyone knows, actually people say mind control. It's actually behavioral modification, and mind control might be part of it. The MK part refers to an organization within CIA that existed during the Cold War. It's the Directorate of Plans. It's now called the Directorate of Operations. For a brief period of time, it's called the National Clandestine Service. But MK, when this program was running, was the Directorate of Plans. And specifically, the Technical Services Division within the Directorate of Plans. They ran the MK Ultra program. So the MK is a digraph. MK Ultra is what we know as a cryptonym for that program. So just having MK doesn't mean it has anything to do with behavioral modification. It just means it's a program in Technical Services Division. So let's look at some of the history. Now, Project Shadow, 1947, interesting date. That's when they start exploring like mind control, behavioral modification. And it's my personal speculation that I'm not sure it's because the Russians were doing it in 1947. But it's interesting that 47 was about the time that the Nazi scientists were And actually, the SS officers were working alongside the CIA. And could it be a telepathic encounter with a Roswell ET survivor? This is purely like speculation. But 47 is an interesting date. And the fact that it was first called Project Chatter was also interesting to me. Bluebird took over in 1950, Artichoke 51, and finally 53 was MK Ultra. And MK Search later was about creating a truth serum for interrogating captured Soviet spies. But going back to Ultra, it studied the feasibility of LSD. And it also had two goals. One's offensive, that is, can you manipulate a foreign leader? And defensive, can we prevent the use of this manipulation? Can we prevent it from having an effect on our own leaders? Now, the MK program as MK Ultra ceased in the about early 70s, 72 thereabouts. The reason why you know anything about it is because it was revealed in the congressional investigations of CIA through the Church Committee, for example, was one. The Pike, I believe it was the Pike Commission as well. I might need correction on that. But the House and the Senate both investigated CIA, and the MK Ultra program was revealed. It would not have been revealed had it still been ongoing. So the program does not exist. However, it was a springboard to research paranormal metaphysics. Here's where the higher consciousness, remote viewing, psychoenergetics, telekinesis. Psychoenergetics is a catch-all phrase of being able to use your mind to expand, I would say, consciousness expansion, mind expansion, and all the effects that that might have. And along with that is spoon bending. It might interest you that there was a McDonnell Douglas executive in Huntington Beach, California, who invited CIA officers to bend spoons with him, and his name was Jack Houck. If you know Melinda Leslie, she talks very much about Jack Houck, and she does sponsor spoon bending parties as well, like Jack did. CIA officers were engaged in spoon bending to show you how serious we were about the paranormal and metaphysical aspects. So we know that MK Ultra is not operational today, but what is operational is even more interesting. The Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Agency is the IC version of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. I guess ours is called an activity. So what they're interested in, among many things that's related to MK Ultra, genome editing, for example, bioinformatics, biometrics, you can read it for yourself, DNA sequencing, brain activity, psychometrics. There's a website where you can explore more of what they're doing. And of interest to me was MIST, Molecular Information Storage, using DNA to store digital data. It's like William Gibson's Neuromancer, Johnny Mnemonic coming to life. They're actually looking at the feasibility of DNA storing data. Let's look at some classifications. Above top secret, there's nothing really above top secret. It's all top secret. But there are compartments that are so narrow and so limited as to who's read into them that for all intents and purposes, they might as well be above top secret, because just having a top secret clearance does not necessarily qualify you to have that information. The one that I know related to Bob Fisher again is crypto. The crypto clearance. He claims to have had an above top secret clearance. What he really meant to say is, I had a top secret crypto clearance. Not many people have that. So that's an example of a so-called above top secret clearance. And if you look at FOIAs, you'll see an alphabet soup of markings. The most common one is SITK no form. Top secret is obvious. Special intelligence is communications intelligence, or SIGINT. Talent keyhole. Talent is ISR, is airborne sensors. Keyhole is space-based sensors. Now, keyhole, why keyhole? Well, the pattern that the satellites make over the Earth is very much like an hourglass, except the very top of that hourglass is very narrow ellipse, and the bottom of that hourglass is a much longer ellipse, slightly wider. So it reminded NRO of keyholes. So therefore, they named that program keyhole, that compartment keyhole. No foreign means no foreign, and that means not even to Five Eyes. The British UFO files were labeled UK only, no foreign, which means that the British did not share its files with the US government. It kept those files to itself until they were formally released. Let's look at Cosmic. I used to listen to Art Bell when he hosted Coast to Coast AM, and he would have like either call in, when he had open lines, or somebody would call in as a guest claiming to have cosmic top secret clearance, and they know all about the UFO, what's going on behind the scenes, and here's my story because I had cosmic top secret. Cosmic does not, just because it's cosmic doesn't mean anything to do with UFOs or UAPs. Cosmic refers to a NATO classification. It's held within NATO only. The US IC does not use cosmic in anything. But if you look at NATO documents, if you FOIA those, and I don't think they have an FOIA process over in NATO, but they will have markings for cosmic. So what would it contain? It could contain things that are of vital interest to NATO, such as the movement of Russian leaders back in the Cold War. If the Russian leadership, the Communist Party leadership, headed for the bunkers, the tanks from the First Guards Army headed for Fulda Gap on the East German, West German border. So you got leadership getting out of town, tanks on the border, and you're seeing indications that the strategic rocket forces, the ICBMs, are getting ready to launch. That's cosmic importance, right? So that's the kind of thing got labeled cosmic. There are no agents at CIA. No NSA agents, NRO, DIA, NGA. We don't have agents. We have officers. Now, the FBI, the DEA, Secret Service, law enforcement components have agents, but not in the intelligence community. We're officers, and you can read the kind of officers we are. But we're never agents. So what's an agent? It's basically a foreign citizen from another country, a foreign national, citizen of another country, who, for whatever reason, mostly we find that folks overseas want to help the United States for ideological purposes. And they are compensated monetarily or with goods and services. They have information to provide because they're in a position to provide that information to us, and we compensate them accordingly. Now, in police work, it's known as a CI, so a confidential informant. Anyone who is a police officer knows what a CI is. And a police officer knows that just because the CI is providing information to the police department, the CI is not a police officer. That's the closest analogy I can give to you about why there are no agents in those big 5 agencies. They're not intelligence officers. And anyone claiming to be an agent for one of the intelligence agencies, I would label them outright imposters, because no self-respecting intelligence officer will call themselves an agent at all. It's just not done. Now let's look at the budget a little bit, and I discussed a little bit about the budget in terms of how to fund something without having a budget, because it comes out of your natural, your normal budget allocations going to your agency. There are 2 parts to the IC budget related to intelligence. One is called the NIP, the National Intelligence Program. The other is called the MIP, Military Intelligence Program. Now, DNI has recently released numbers about what those might be. And they're usually up in the upper 85 to $90 billion per year, with the majority of that going toward the national intelligence program, not the military side, the national side. So that includes all of these civilian agencies. And so the compartmentation is so tight, they're competing for this money, that sometimes the compartmentation is used as a tool to protect exclusive turfs. You don't want someone to like trounce on your program. So you keep that program secret from another agency because you don't want them involved for whatever reason. And even within the agency, one part of one agency may not know another part of the same agency is doing. There's just internal compartmentation. So as far as DIA is concerned, again, it's the General Defense Intelligence Program, GDIP. And within the GDIP, it gets broken down into various offices. Within CIA, it's the CIAP, the CIA program. NSA is the Consolidated Cryptologic Program, the National Geospatial Program. These are pockets or buckets of money. And inside their budgets, inside these pockets of money are budget line items called BLIs, budget line items. And next to the budget line item is a specific program that's addressing a specific need. You can actually, if you know where to look, download most of those programs. They're actually, most of them are not classified unless they are compartmented. And I found an example of an Air Force compartmented program, which is basically a blank sheet of paper, but it did have the top level number of how much they're spending in that program. So it's not completely like dark, black, it's more like shades of gray. Now let's look at some Space Force stuff here. Russia has had Space Forces for a long time. It's part of the Russian Aerospace Forces. I found an interesting quote from a Russian officer, Sergei Brezhnev, and he said, "We are unfortunately not ready to fight extraterrestrial civilizations." And he said that in all seriousness to a question posed by Russian media. And that's his position. So I should have sourced that one, but it's an interesting quote from someone in the Russian space infrastructure. Now, the Space Forces of Russia is tasked with monitoring and defending Russia from potential threats from space. The U.S. Space Force, pretty much the same kind of mission. It was the 18th member of the IC. Now, the U.S. Space Force, U.S. Space Command is different from the U.S. Space Force. The command itself is known as a Unified Combatant Command. It's sort of like STRATCOM, Strategic Command, or CENTCOM, Central Command, or SOCOM, Southern Command, SOCCOM, Special Operations Command. And so these commands are in time of a conflict or an operation have the authority to marshal in these other assets from these other services for that particular operation or that particular campaign. So SpaceCom, if they are activated, they can reach into the U.S. Space Force, they can reach into the space assets of the U.S. Navy, they can reach into other space assets, perhaps from the NRO, to do this. Now, wait a minute, you said NRO, isn't that an intelligence community civilian side? Well, the NSA, the DIA, the NGA, and the NRO are not only civilian intelligence agencies, but they are also called combat support agencies. So the Secretary of Defense can marshal resources from these agencies for Department of Defense needs because they're also combat support agencies. And there's certain, I've seen certain FOIAs released where they mention combat support agencies without really mentioning who those agencies are. So I just told you that it's those 4 agencies and that are IC as well as military agencies. If they're supporting the Department of Defense, they're combat support agencies. NSA actually automatically broke it out as NSA and CSS. You might see CSS. The CSS part is the service cryptologic elements, the Central Security Service. These are the uniformed members of the armed forces working at NSA. So that's the military side of NSA. Recently, I saw what purports to be a memorandum for the record from NRO, Central Security Services. And this is the memorandum for the record, allegedly, that was seen, which prompted Admiral Wilson to seek out more information about what's going on. I believe that's the way it was pitched. Correct me if I'm wrong. I might be wrong. But every time I see a breakout or breakdown of the Wilson Davis notes, I always see this memo pop up. And that memo is very strange because the addresses and the format is just totally strange. It doesn't look authentic. Now, the second page does look authentic. Why do I say that? Well, the persons mentioned on the second page actually appeared a long time ago with Art Bell, Coast to Coast AM, and mentioned the fact that they were going to Rachel, Nevada for this meeting. And so that part's real. And that happened a long time ago, but in the 90s, I guess, and it was dated 91. But the front part of that just didn't seem real, and the last paragraph didn't seem real. It doesn't seem like the kind of memo that would be written by the NRO from a non-existent Central Security Service, which should have been NSA. I'll just leave it at that, and I'd be happy to break that down for anybody. In fact, I can write a better memo that looks more real than that one. So here's some interesting revelations. So there's a phenomenon that occurred in the Soviet Union in the town of Petrozavodsk. Petrozavodsk. And I practiced that many times. I had 2 years of university Russian and not very good student, I guess. But Petrozavodsk is a town in the Soviet Union where some dock workers saw a huge star-like ball of light flashing out of the dark sky. You can read it there. Spread out like a jellyfish. There's a picture of what it looked like. And it transformed into a shroud. They mentioned the colors that it looked like. It hovered over the city and sent out these numerous thin rays that you can see in the picture. There happened to be a TASS news agency reporter present, and I believe that may have been sourced to that news agency reporter. But it was seen by police officers, sailors, and an ambulance crew as eyewitnesses, as well as just normal everyday citizens. UPI then took that report and then published it here in the US. Russians report UFO like star over city. James Oberg is a NASA engineer, and he believed that the Petrozavodsk phenomenon was a test of the fractional orbital bombardment system. Well, the last time, now keep in mind that this happened in 1977. The last time the Soviet Union tested the FOBS or FOBS system was in 1971. 6 years prior, they abandoned the program. So you can't attribute what was seen here to this fractional orbital bombardment system. And it was studied by both Soviet scientists and the US intelligence community. Both on the Soviet side and the US side, we observed that there was an association with a certain missile, the SS-20 Sabre, which was an intermediate range ballistic missile. This missile was designed for NATO countries. It was designed to be deployed from the US to strike targets in NATO as part of a European war, a nuclear war in NATO. It was not designed to reach across the ocean. It was not an ICBM. It could not have touched the US, but our allies would have been at risk. So every time the Russians, well, not every time, but many times when the Russians would test the SS-20 Sabre, here comes these domes of light also appearing. Now, NASIC's predecessor, FTD, they still stuck with the fact that, according to them, they thought the dome of light could be a missile countermeasure to obscure the numbers and trajectories of a Soviet nuclear missile attack. And the dome of light was used by Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina. He actually used the phrase dome of light in a comment he made. That's how we got to know it as the dome of light. There are domes of light associated with more recent Russian missiles, the SS-25 and 27 Topol and Topol-M. They did use similar technology to evaluate missile countermeasures. But the phenomenon we know as Petrozavodsk was 8 years earlier than this first test launch of these missiles, and the SS-20 tests that occurred much earlier than these missiles. The Avangard, which is the Russian hypersonic glide vehicle, can fly at Mach 27, and it creates a kind of a plasma field around it. As it skirts the upper atmosphere, it carries up to a 2 megaton warhead. And so there was no such thing when the Petrozavodsk phenomenon occurred 4 decades earlier. If you viewed the Disclosure 2.0 gathering hosted by Mr. Greer, Dr. Greer, you have Timofey Egorov as one of the guests, and he said that the Petrozavodsk phenomenon is considered by Russia to be a true UAP. And just trivia, every December 26, and I just picked 2 dates, the Soviet Union and now Russia launches one of their major ballistic missiles, because no one's at home, that is home in the IC. We are all on vacation. We have a watch office probably, and we take care of it the next day, but they have a habit of launching missiles on December 26th, the day after Christmas. Okay, so let's look at some DoD collection. ISR is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. There are several ISR craft, and we're going to talk about Corporal Ball. And a pilot of the Corporal Ball, who's now a respected scholar of military aviation history, he gave a first-person account when he was the pilot or flying the Corporal Ball aircraft. He described a translucent milky white wall of light from the ground all the way up as far as he could see out of the cockpit window, and it radiated at 6,200 miles per hour outward. The Cobra Ball was designed to collect against Russian missile tests over Kamchatka. That's where it flies. And unfortunately, this is the plane that the Russians mistook when it shot down the Korean airliner. They thought they were going after Cobra Ball. Instead, they tragically shot down the Korean airliner. And another Bob Fish insert here, if I may. Bob Fish described the WC-135 as a weather plane. The WC-135 is not a weather plane. It is an ISR aircraft, and its job is to collect radionucleotides, nuclear particles suspended in the atmosphere, especially after a suspected nuclear test. In fact, they can still collect signatures from very old nuclear tests. You can still collect and determine what test it was from by breaking out the 18 components of radionucleotides that I can't pronounce it, excuse me, but there are 18 components that they can collect, and the radionuclides, okay, 18 components that can tell you the mixture or the formula of that nuclear device, and they can then correlate it to something that occurred in the past. So they're still up there. Jumvalo Melchizedek, a spiritual visionary, esoteric researcher, wrote a book in 2003 called Living in the Heart. And in it, he, on page 50, he described an interesting conversation he had with a major in the Air Force. And the major in the Air Force, she said, the satellites could see a person's light body, that is the Merkaba field, as a person creates one through a meditative practice that Melchizedek teaches, in fact, that it creates so much energy in the person's light body that it can be seen in space. And she relates that the military was concerned about the creation of these light bodies. They didn't know what it was, but they now know it's part of a new consciousness that is unfolding on Earth at this time. I take Melchizedek's word at his word. I mean, I can't dispute something that I wasn't there to either say or not say that was true, but I take him at his word that this happened. So I think it's interesting that that the Air Force major said this to Melchizedek, and that's a person that I think people should interview and say exactly, you know, what else did the major tell you? There are two satellites that could do this, are the Defense Support Program satellites, or DSP, and the newer CBERS, or Space-Based Infrared System. The DSP program is fading away. They're very old satellites, and they'll eventually be replaced by CBERS as the constellation for launch detection. And the Russians also collected against the dome of lights using radars, or collected against UAPs, in fact, against radars. There was an interview with a Major General Alexeyev, and he said that the Soviet leadership actually ordered that certain devices, such as theodolites, which is basically just an instrumented telescope, a range instrumentation telescope, and radar stations be used to make contact. And the special military loads, these are the missile launches that carry not real warheads, but for lack of a better term, dummy warheads. And when the Russians would like launch one of these missiles with a dummy warhead, UAPs would show up. And these objects were recorded in instrumented data, because these radars are very good at detecting reentry vehicles from Russian missiles. So they're very good at looking at very fast, very small objects traveling at great speeds. And it's not classified to say that, for example, within the Russian capabilities also, there was a Mark 21 warhead that was associated with the Peacekeeper ICBM, which is no longer in service. And the Air Force released some information about it. That warhead, the reentry vehicle, actually enters the atmosphere at 7.9 kilometers per second. And these radars have no trouble whatsoever tracking that. This is called the Neiman P. The left side is a transmitter, the right side is a receiver. And it was seen tracking anomalous phenomenon. In fact, the Russians say we use this radar to track anomalous phenomenon. And they gave a lot of information about this. So I can say in general terms that this is an S-band radar. And S-band means 2 gigahertz to 4 gigahertz as radar frequencies. It works somewhere in that range of frequencies. There's another interesting radar, I believe, that is the AN Spy-1 radar, the Aegis fire control radar, that also is an S-band radar. And so the Navy guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I'm accurate in saying that the Spy-1 radar on the USS Princeton operated in that frequency range that this Neiman P radar operated in. Now, the Pechora ballistic missile early warning radar, these radars, it's a system of radars in the periphery of the Soviet Union. And they're there to look for ballistic missile launches from the US. A ballistic missile early warning, that's what it is. They also can detect satellites and compare the satellites to known ephemeris or known orbital paths of those satellites and identify them. Well, sometimes they collected things that they could not identify, and they weren't missiles. They thought they were missiles, and they went to a high state of readiness. But they were not missiles, and they realized they were not missiles. And they continue to collect or detect certain types of objects like that, which were of interest to the Soviet leadership and the Russian leadership. And these radars operated in VHF. Let's say between 100 and 200 megahertz. That's what the best I can give you, because they're still, like, the exact frequencies are sensitive. How about China? This is another satellite, another slide that I thought would be redacted. It's not known but discoverable that the CIA had these collection sites in Iran. Even through the early periods of the Islamic Republic of Iran, these collection sites existed, but we lost them in '79 when Senator Gary Hart of Colorado, when he discovered that, you know, the government of Iran changed hands, he said, "What about those CIA guys up there in the north?" And he said that in a public way, and that embarrassed the Iranian government, and so we were kicked out of the country. Otherwise, we wouldn't. I think we would still been fine there. But we got kicked out, and these collection facilities were there to collect intelligence on Soviet ICBM and missile tests from the mountains of northern Iran. So without them, where do we go? Well, we approached China. That's right, the People's Republic of China, our erstwhile adversary. We approached them with a proposal that we build these collection facilities on their territory, close enough to the Soviet border so that we get a good view of the missile launches and the missile impacts. And the Chinese agreed. I listed the sources of that information, the open sources of that information. It leaked fairly early, but we never acknowledged it. Now we do now acknowledge that there was such a program where CIA technical officers from the Directorate of Science Technology worked with the Chinese counterparts in the People's Liberation Army side by side, collecting against Russian missiles. And yours truly was one of those officers who worked with the Chinese directly and spent a lot of time with the Chinese, even instructed the Chinese and how to analyze radar signals. It was all like authorized transfer of intelligence information because our target was the Soviet Union at that time, a bigger target. And so that program existed, and as far as I know, I don't know what the status of that program is, but there were sensors there that could have tracked the domes of light, and we briefed them on everything. They wanted to know everything, what we put in their country. We had to tell them, this is for this and that's for that. And so they knew about UAPs. They also had some indication, I believe, that these things were flying over their skies before we showed up. But nothing happens in China unless it's sanctioned by the Communist Party. You just cannot set up a UAP. You cannot have a MUFON in China unless the Communist Party says you can have a MUFON in China. So the UFO China Society was there to continue scientific study. So they were informed that these are real and likely informed by us, the CIA. Now let's go to the Galactic Federation. And as you can see, I'm just jumping all over the place because I want to cover a lot of things. Eshed is not a NASA guy in Israel. A lot of folks thought he's this NASA guy, you know, like the NASA administrator of Israel. He wasn't. He's closer to being the counterpart to the director of NRO. And he, as you know, made these statements about the existence of a galactic federation and the fact that the US government knows about the existence of the Galactic Federation. And it was remote viewed. January 13, 1988, and there's the URL if you want to pull that up. In the notes, it said that the interviewer or facilitator was ED, and the remote viewer was MR. So ED could have been Major Ed Dames. You know him from being a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM. And MR is likely to have been the late Mel Riley. It's a fascinating report. of being led into a chamber and having robed figures all around and having to lie down on a table to be examined. Did Roswell really happen? Well, this is Chase Brandon, Chase Brandon. He was a very senior officer in CIA. He was in the Directorate of Operations part of CIA, and that's publicly known. And he wrote a book called Crypto's Conundrum. And it's about his take on what happened at Roswell, but he went way back. He went back to Atlantis. He traced it all the way through a character he called Chalmers, who had past lives in these various eras in Earth history, going back to the city of Atlantis. And there are some interesting details in here. Now, Chase originally went on Coast to Coast AM and he talked to the press about discovering the files about Roswell, and he stated publicly on the air that there was a crash and there were bodies and there were not human bodies. So he stated that. And CIA heard that and said, Chase, you can't say that. So you need to do, you can't just go on the air and say that. So Chase said, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book. And so he wrote a book called Crypto's Conundrum. And his interview with these was about the same time the book was ready to be published. So there's that. So did he just say that so that it gives more credence to his book, or did he say something of significance in the book? Well, if you read the book, I mean, he says some things, many things of significance. For example, that these UFOs start from the water, fly out into the sky, and come back into the water, and that they're called USOs when they do that. And he wrote this back in 2012. So I found that to be interesting that he would say that. But he says that the cover-up was about hiding the fact that there were alien forces on the earth, and that there were like ancestors of Atlantis on the earth, and the government knows about this. That was his whole thing about the book. So read the book and just hold it lightly, just hold it lightly. It is more of a science fiction book, but this guy was kind of informed. Now, for you guys who've seen Men in Black, the movie Men in Black with Tommy Lee Jones, what's the connection to Chase Brandon? They're first cousins. And Chase Brandon was the Hollywood liaison officer. He helped Hollywood with scripts of making it more realistic, of having the production crew and the actors to CIA headquarters to see CIA officers at work, so they're better informed about how to act like a CIA officer and sort of like have a better story about how CIA really works. Robert Gates said that, hey, I have a respect for Chase and I'm not going to question what Chase says. He didn't say what Chase said was BS or wrong or he's crazy. He didn't say that. In fact, he said that he can't, he's not going to say either way whether it's right or wrong, that Chase may have made it up or not, but he has a lot of respect for him. So this pretty much shows that CIA doesn't think UFOs are fake, because on the CIA website, if you go to that URL, you'll see tips on how to investigate a UFO. And they use the Lonnie Zamora incident of April 24, 1964 as the exemplar. This is how you investigate a UFO. Nowhere on that page, if you read it yourself, do they say that UFOs are fake, that there actually are aircraft, or that they're anything like swamp gas, weather balloons, all the above. No, they say this is how you investigate a UFO. And by the way, the Lonnie Zamora incident seemed to be a very credible incident. So you can go ahead and look at that, and that's a fun read. And then, of course, you have the former directors of the National Intelligence and Central Intelligence, that there are a lot more sightings than have been made public. And that's from an informed way of saying that there's a lot more sightings than the 143 plus balloon that were not made public. And of course, Ambassador Woolsey related the story of his pilot friend, his plane stopping at midair at 40,000 feet. And CIA Director Brennan went on to say that it's something that we don't understand, the type of phenomenon we don't understand, and it might be a different form of life. So now we come to personal speculations. This is the history part. Okay, paperclip. Used to be called Overcast and changed the name to paperclip. Germany surrendered early May 45. We know that. But immediately thereafter, there was the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency started to operate to collect the Nazi archives and locate Nazi scientists. And who helped them? Well, it was the Nazi party officials and SS officers. In fact, Waffen SS troops from the 15th, 19th, and 20th Waffen SS divisions from the Baltic states switched uniforms, wore American uniforms, and guarded their former masters, high officials in the Nazi party. And that is a true statement. So the first group of Nazi scientists arrived in the fall of 45, and there's the happy group photo of them at Fort Bliss in 46. So we have paperclip running. We have Jay.IOA running, and Jay.IOA collecting all of this data about what's in the Nazi archives. Well, somewhere in there, Truman was briefed about the Nazi obsession with bloodlines and hybridization. They were really interested about this. So I had to speculate that the German scientists revealed the existence of a human hybrid breakaway civilization. Did they reveal that they researched, trying to research reproducing advanced technology, hybrid advanced technology? And did they reveal their research into a superior civilization of ancient origin that's still on Earth? And off to the right side, you see the two vehicles there well, the only industrial country with an industrial base that's viable after World War II is the United States. And supposing that there were some plans or blueprints or whatever you want to call them of these two top vehicles, that's up to speculation. I don't know. But the bottom one definitely was a vehicle. It was taken to RIPAT T2 intelligence. And so the Horton 229 is an actual craft. And doesn't it look like some of our stealth craft today? So what was that organization running around the world trying to find evidence of the hybrid civilizations? It was the Deutsches Annenerbe. They investigate the supposed hidden occult origins of the German race. Occult does not mean demonic, it just means hidden. So they wanted to link the German ancestry of the Aryan race to the inhabitants of Atlantis. And they believe that when Atlantis was destroyed, that the survivors of Atlantis spread across the earth. To the New World, for example, they went everywhere looking for the survivors of Atlantis. They went, strangely enough, to the Antarctica, looking for evidence, artifacts that they existed. Did they find them? I don't know. But they supported these expeditions. They were into these occult practices, psychic phenomenon, and unfortunately tragically conducted these human genetic experiments in the concentration camps of trying to experiment with DNA. And here's a picture of them with Tibetan dignitaries in Lhasa in 38. So how are you going to hide all of this from becoming public? Well, one way is to create an intelligence agency. And at that time, in January of 46, now mind you, May of 45, we have Nazi SS officers assisting the US government with finding information that's in the Nazi archives Some of that information it was regard to their research into Atlantean civilizations, into breakaway civilizations, advanced human hybrids. And how do you hide that? Well, you need an intelligence organization called the Central Intelligence Group, which was founded in January of 46, the beginning of the year in 46. And its purpose was to hide the association of the US government and these former Nazi officers. They classified the exploitation of advanced technology gleaned from the Nazi archives. And this creation of this National Intelligence Authority and this Central Intelligence Group was the birth of the modern national security state. Whereas Paperclip brought over 1,600 Nazis, 1,000 of those Nazis actually worked for CIG and later CIA. They were spies for the CIA. And we sent them back into Europe to spy against the Russians. They were more easily able to assimilate into East European countries. And of course, the famous one was General Reinhard Gehlen. He was sent back to help establish the West German Intelligence Service, the BND. Now let's go up to Roswell. Now with all that history behind, now you know that, okay, the CIA, the CIG, was working with Nazis, and that part of that work was recovering artifacts, recovering technology that the Nazis were working on, and now we have Roswell. Not to say that Roswell was German technology, not to say that, but let's look at it. So there was an eyewitness account, Mr. and Mrs. Wilmot. What they described on July the 2nd looked very much like what we would call UAP. It's an object that glowed from the inside, not as if it was lit from the outside, traveling very fast and very high with no sound. Now that happened on July the 2nd. On July the 8th, comes a newspaper article. The 2nd and 8th, it was a long period of time. Now, I don't believe that the recovery of these objects occurred after July the 8th. I believe the recovery of the objects happened prior to July the 8th. And I cannot prove that because I have not gone into the CIG FOIA. I don't know if there is a CIG FOIA. Maybe it's held by the CIA. Maybe that was the information that Chase Brandon found in the historical intelligence collection. But going from there, there was some foreknowledge, I believe, that there was such craft that the Nazis were interested in. And who flew the craft? I don't know. They weren't human, I don't believe. I have not seen the files that Chase Brandon saw. But could have been the Atlantean craft that was flown with hybrids on board. I don't know. That's just pure speculation on my part. I'm just trying to connect dots, and some dots sort of like our outliers and can't be connected. But this is the way I'm trying to sort it in my own mind. You absolutely do not have to believe anything I say. You can just toss it away. So finally, we come to later on in July. A law created the CIA and what was called the National Military Establishment. The Department of Defense wasn't named until August the 10th, 49. Right after Roswell through August of 49, it was the National Military Establishment that was created. And what's of interest was the fiscal year in the modern Roswell era between July 1st, 47 and July 30, 48. Fiscal years that year where the government gets funded. Right now it's October 1st to September 30th that the government is supposed to be funded if Congress is able to put a bill in time for the president's signature before October 1st. I don't know when was the last time that happened, but be that as it may, let's go back to May of 48 when they had the Armed Services Procurement Act. It provided defense agencies a means of non-competitive practices. Sole source defense contracts, where the Pentagon would go to one person or one contractor, one entity saying, you got the contract, we're not competing it. And it can hide the budget. This law allowed the government to hide the budget of these sole source contracts. And that greatly increased the power and influence of defense contractors. And that is the start, in May of 48, that birthed the modern military industrial complex. It did not start with Eisenhower giving that speech. He had to live with this as a reality, that these contractors had so much power in the Department of Defense. And you probably heard the existence of the rogue programs. My argument is the programs aren't necessarily rogue. I don't believe that there are rogue programs. I do believe there are unacknowledged programs, but there are laws on the books, like Title 10, Section 119, that allows these types of programs to exist, out of sight, out of mind. And there's an executive order 13526 recently, I think most recently updated by President Obama. I don't know if President Trump or President Biden had done anything with 13526, but this executive order, based on US Code 10, Section 119, allows for carve-outs and unacknowledged SAPs that do not have to be reported. However, having said that, don't even think for a moment that no one knows what's in them, because in the House Appropriations Committee, there's a subcommittee that actually can look into these unacknowledged SAPs. And though they may be unacknowledged, they're going to be called something else as a cover name for something else. And that cover name is going to have a dollar figure behind it. So they're not truly unacknowledged in that sense. And believe it or not, the subcommittee members in that particular appropriations committee are cleared at an extremely high level. They probably have more tickets or compartments than I had. I had 26 when I retired and signed off on all 26, read out, but they probably have as many as they need to do their job. And so who knows? It might be in there. Okay, now we at McMinnville, Oregon case. Now you're probably familiar with this particular craft with the conning tower on top. It appeared in Life magazine, July 26, 1950. It was the Trent's photographs that appeared. This case has never been successfully debunked. And if you want to read great analysis on this case, look at Richard Dolan's work. Richard Dolan's work on the McMinnville case is head and shoulders above anything I've ever read. Very impressive. And so look at that. It's never, ever been debunked, not even by the US government. This has not been debunked. So let's fast forward a little bit and some background information. So we know that it was seen in McMinnville, Oregon. Now, on April 30th, 2005, a satellite on National Reconnaissance Office launch number 16, satellite payload was launched on a Titan 4B. This was a ICBM missile that was converted for space launch. And in fact, during the Gemini program, the Titan was converted to launch Gemini astronauts. So here's the Titan 4B launching the last one to carry a payload up into space. It was the 30th Titan 4B to carry anything up into space for the National Reconnaissance Office. So there's two Titan 4Bs left. One went to the National Museum of the Air Force of Wright-Patt. That makes sense. It's the National Air Force Museum. You want one there. The other one went to, of all places, an obscure Air and Space Museum, Aviation and Space Museum in McMinnville, Oregon. Think about that. Not the National Air Space Museum, Washington, D.C. We have one here in Tucson, but no, it went to McMinnville, Oregon. And look at the launch logo. Now I'm going to do something here that I think I can do on the Mac. All right, here we have. My, what big feet you have. This isn't a gorilla. I call it Bigfoot. And what kind of bird is that? It's a pelican. Who is the pelican? I'll let you answer that for yourself. And then also, sorry for that, you also have palm trees. And of course you have the missile, and you have a bright sun, or is that an orb? I don't know. Let's just call it a sun for argument's sake. There's sun and a missile. Okay, Bigfoot, pelican, palm trees. And where's the palm trees come from? Well, have you ever heard of Palmdale, California? It's the home of the skunk works. Palmdale, California. I'm looking at this and I'm saying, my gosh, is this like a tease? Is this just coincidence? They put these objects, these two animals and this palm trees here, or what are they trying to tell us? And the fact that there was a famous McMinnville, Oregon UFO case, and they took this logo, which was on the Titan IV, and the last two Titan IVs went to the place where they had this UFO incident. And look at that logo. I am developing this slide. I can expand on it in a very surprising way. CIA has a letter from me telling them, informing them how I'm going to expand this for a future presentation and describe more in detail of this particular case. Now, this is known as the infamous slide 54, because it's the 54th one in the deck. And I promise you, I know we went long, but we're almost done. This is called informed speculation. I think it's hidden history, but let's call it informed speculation. And I'll clue you in on why it's informed. So a lot of these inter-row launch mission patches, launch logos, tend to depict reptilians and occult figures having some kind of dominance over the earth. It's very unusual that they would show that. So I speculated based on other things that I've learned, and I'll leave it at that, that we're reptilian beings able to manipulate primate DNA to accelerate human hybrids. Did that happen? And were some of those human hybrids people that in myth and legend we call Atlanteans? In fact, aren't we all human hybrids? After all, let us make man in our image, says Genesis. Why aren't we like apes? Why aren't we like the bonobo, the gorilla, the chimpanzee? That's matter for speculation. But did they do this? And are the accelerated ones really the Atlanteans? Did they ordain this idea of kingship and priesthood through selected hybrid families? And were they able to establish aristocratic bloodlines? Bloodlines in aristocracy are so important back in ancient times. And hybrid families of power and wealth. Did they establish that? And even today, are they exercising some kind of political power, economic control off the stage, or hidden social influence? And I'm just leaving that as it is. I'm just saying that it's informed because I wrote to CIA and said, here's why I know this. And CIA came back and said, well, we look forward to your presentation when you do this on these two slides. And I have a serial number for that particular submission, so I can refer to it when I do these two slides and expand it into a future presentation. Personally, I believe this is one of the core secrets. That's my personal opinion. Let's look at some of the logos, and I'll go through them real fast. NROL 4, launch 4. Launches numerals are not necessary in the order the spacecraft was launched. So I'll just say that, but this is number 4. number 6, number 19, number 32, the Eye of Horus, number 35, and by the way, her name is Angelique. She was named by some folks in NRO. They said she's Angelique. I don't know where the Angelique name came from, but that's her name. And there's Angelique on an actual payload fairing for an NRO satellite. Anubis, god of the afterlife, Egyptian god of the afterlife on NRL 38. That A stands for Atlas. AV is Atlas 5, number 23 in the launch sequence. United Launch Alliance, 45th Space Wing, and I don't remember what LR stood for. I'm sure there's people in the audience that would know that. There's Anubis, Egyptian god of the afterlife, on a NRO spacecraft that US taxpayers paid for. And on the spacecraft itself, now I should say the previous one was a mission patch, as you can tell, something you would sew on a jacket. On the spacecraft itself, we have 3-headed dragon. And if you notice that around this official little poster the NRO put out, you have reptilian skin surrounding all of this. Reptilian skin in a circle for the O. And there's our 3 dragons on the Atlas V, which, by the way, the RD 180 rocket engines is thanks to the Russians. We launch spy satellites against Russia using rocket engines supplied by the Russians. And there's a constellation. I don't know if this is Draco, but if there's any amateur astronomers out there, that might be a clue hidden in plain sight. I don't know what constellation that is at all. That's 38. 39 is the octopus. And there's our octopus on a payload fairing. 49, Latin translates to the most important fall. You heard of fallen angels, and that fallen angels might have been the Atlanteans that were separated from the other humans because they were too far advanced and their civilization was destroyed, therefore fallen. I found that to be very intriguing. And Betty here is probably Betty Sapp. When this mission went up, Betty Sapp was slated, S-A-P-P, Betty Sapp, was slated to be the first woman director of the NRO. Most important fall. And here's another patch for this, or another logo. The devil you know. Vandenberg Air Force Base, the first Delta IV heavy launch, the rocket that actually launched it, from Space Launch Center number 6 at Vandenberg. Space Launch Control, maybe, number 6. The devil you know. Get your kicks on 66. And Green Door. Green Door assignments in the Air Force are black program assignments. And if you look at this patch, I don't know if it's a magician or an insect, but this patch is so intriguing because the more you look at it, you see more things into it. But I see 2 red eyes here, and I don't know, this looks like a Merlin, the magician hat. I don't know, but keep looking at it. And some people see insects. Some people see a magician with a Merlin the magician hat. This red spot here over the United States is the southwest of the United States. Okay, southwest United States. What black program would exist in a southwestern state, like in a desert? Leave it at that. But these black programs are called
It
behind the
also, just real quick, it also
yeah.
looks like it's holding a dagger, the golden overlay with the.
Ah, yes, good, Jay. Dagger. I see that now. Thank you for that.
No
Interesting.
problem.
And the U2 Dragon Lady. That's the nickname for the U2 that CIA gave her, the Dragon Lady. And that's it, really. There's the CIA reading room for UFOs. I recommend going there first because that's where all the UFO archives are located at. And if you see a link through a Google search and you click on the direct link, you just get to the front page of the reading room. You don't get into where the actual document is. I recommend doing a right mouse click, do a copy and paste it into a browser, and then go from there, and you'll get right to the article itself. And I use the Black Vault, that's a repository of FOIA. And I also like the War Zone because they tend to be well connected to Defense Department programs. And that is it. So I say embrace why hold lightly as my way of saying I don't reject anything outright. Just because I don't believe it, I don't reject it. As an analyst, I'm trained to analyze all source intelligence. So even if it's something that seems completely wild to me, I won't hold it tightly, and not in the sense that I'm going to believe it and it's going to be like part of my UFO conversation, but I do hold it lightly, and either I find it proven or disproven, and then if it's disproven, I can drop it. But I don't like just because someone says something that I disagree with, I don't attack that person. I may not agree with that person, but I just take it as it's a data point for me, myself, to either research on my own to prove or disprove. And so with that, Jay, I turn it back to you.